The call came on an ordinary Wednesday morning, the kind of morning when Phoenix sunlight poured through the glass walls of my office and bounced off polished marble floors, but the words that reached me through the receiver shattered 15 years of motherhood in one blow. Mrs. Matthews. The wedding planner's voice was polite, strained with the kind of tension that comes before delivering bad news. I regret to inform you that your son Daniel has canceled your invitation to his wedding. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk, the blood in my veins turning cold, but she wasn't finished. He also asked us to keep the $55,000 deposit you provided. My breath caught a sharp gasp that I forced back into silence. 55,000. The sum I had written on a quiet evening 3 weeks ago, when Melissa, my son's fiancée, had approached me with tears trembling on her eyelashes, pleading for help, because weddings were expensive and Daniel's architectural salary couldn't cover their dream celebration. I had told her it would be a gift, that it should remain anonymous so the young couple could enjoy their day without feeling indebted. I had whispered to her in my kitchen while Daniel sat watching television in the next room that this was between us. I thought I was giving them peace. Instead, I had handed them the perfect weapon to erase me from their lives. Through the phone, the planner kept speaking with professional formality, unaware that each syllable carved itself into my heart. Your name has been removed from the guest list, Mrs. Matthews, but all financial arrangements will remain in place as originally contracted. Her words blurred for a moment, drowned beneath the pounding of my pulse. My son had not only decided his mother was unworthy of attending his wedding, but he had ensured that my money, my sacrifice, my silent gift would still pay for his joy. I pressed the speaker button and leaned back into the leather chair that had carried me through board meetings and billion-dollar negotiations, staring at the skyline of a city I had helped shape through my hotel empire. Daniel's betrayal wasn't only about absence. It was about contempt. It was about a son who saw his mother as a checkbook rather than a woman, a partner, a pillar. Mrs. Matthews, are you still there? The planner asked, her voice now hesitant, as if she sensed the ground shifting beneath her professionalism. Yes, I said, my voice steady, though inside I was quaking. Please clarify, did my son give you these instructions alone, or did he claim my consent? There was a pause, then the answer I expected and feared. He said it was a family decision, that you agreed it would be best for everyone if you stepped back, but left the financial contributions unchanged. My jaw tightened. Family decision. Words sharpened into knives. Family had sat together and voted me out of my own child's day while pocketing my sacrifice. Outside my office window, the desert sun climbed higher, glaring down on the city like an unblinking eye. Inside, shadows stretched across contracts and quarterly reports that suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of this betrayal. For decades, I had built Matthews Hospitality from one modest inn into a chain of 23 luxury hotels across the Southwest. Investors who once sneered at a single mother with wild ambition now competed for seats at my table. Competitors respected me. Employees admired me. Partners trusted me. But my son, my only child, looked at me and saw nothing but a bank account he could access, a mother he could dismiss, a woman unworthy of presence, yet worthy of payment. The wedding planner tried to soften the blow, murmuring about irregular circumstances, and her discomfort proceeding without my explicit approval. But I barely heard her. My hand hovered above the phone, trembling torn, between slamming it down and holding on just to hear if there was some shred of decency left in Daniel's instructions. Instead, a vibration buzzed across my desk. A text from Daniel appeared, previewed on the screen with words that made my stomach twist into ice. Stop being dramatic, Mom. You're not coming to the wedding. We're keeping the money since you offered it as a gift. Let's talk when you calm down. Calm down. My lips curled into a bitter smile. In one text, my son had reduced me from the woman who owned the very hotel chain hosting his event to an inconvenient parent whose anger was hysteria to be managed. He thought I was powerless. He thought I would stay silent. He did not know that the deposit he had tried to weaponize connected directly to contracts signed under my empire, to services operated by managers who ultimately answered to me, to venues whose keys I held. The skyline glittered back at me, towers of glass that reflected my own face creased with 62 years of life, but steady, sharp, alive. They had tried to erase me, but in doing so, they had forgotten the most important fact. I built the ground they were standing on, and I could make it vanish with a whisper. My name is Linda Matthews, and I am 62 years old, though people often tell me I carry myself with the posture of someone decades younger. Perhaps it is the way I dress tailored navy suits that command attention. Or perhaps it is the voice honed from years of boardrooms and negotiations, a voice that rarely trembles even when my heart breaks. To most of Phoenix, I am known as the woman who built Matthews Hospitality Group, a company that started with a rundown inn on the edge of town and grew into 23 luxury hotels and resorts, scattered across Arizona, Nevada, and California. My life has been measured in acquisitions, expansions, and the relentless pursuit of excellence, and the skyline outside my window reflects the fruits of that pursuit. But at home, the story has always been different. At home, I have been simply mom, and sometimes not even that. My son Daniel is 35, a talented architect with sketches always spilling from his briefcase lines and angles that he believes will build his legacy. I raised him alone after his father walked out when Daniel was just a toddler. I worked double shifts, balanced ledgers late into the night, and somehow still managed to attend school plays and parent-teacher conferences. Every success I have ever had was anchored in the belief that Daniel's future mattered more than my own comfort. When he was 8, I gave up buying a car so I could send him to a private art class. When he was 17, I borrowed against my hotel equity to cover his tuition at Stanford. I never saw these as sacrifices. I saw them as investments in the man he might become. Melissa entered his life 3 years ago, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue. She was clever, ambitious, and quick to notice the privileges my success could provide. To Daniel, she was excitement and validation. To me, she was a mirror that reflected my worst fears, that my son might forget the foundation of his life, that he might value appearances over substance. I remember the first time Melissa addressed me as if I were a guest at my own table. We had gathered for dinner, and she leaned across the polished oak, smiling sweetly as she said, "Linda, your little event business must keep you so busy. My little event business." At the time, Matthews Hospitality was grossing more annually than the combined revenue of 3 regional hotel chains. But to her, and perhaps to Daniel, my empire was still invisible. They saw only a woman with gray at her temples, a woman whose worth was measured by how quietly she wrote checks. In public, I was a mogul. In private, I was dismissed. That duality carved lines deeper than age ever could. I learned to smile through it, to nod when Daniel introduced me as someone who helps with events, to remain silent when Melissa referred to me as old-fashioned. But silence, I have learned, is often mistaken for weakness, and weakness is an illusion I can no longer afford. The irony is that outside my family, my reputation is untouchable. Investors fly across the country just to sit in my office. Employees refer to me as the matriarch who built opportunities for thousands. Competitors study my strategies in whispered admiration. And yet, at the dinner table where I should have been honored, I was reduced to background noise. It is the split-life queen of an empire and invisible mother that explains why Daniel thought he could cancel my presence at his wedding and still enjoy the fruits of my labor. He had never truly seen me. He had only seen what I provided. And Melissa, with her careful crocodile tears and polished lies, had only encouraged his blindness. As I sat in my office replaying the planner's words, I realized this betrayal had not been born overnight. It had been growing quietly, watered by every moment I allowed myself to be diminished at family gatherings, nourished by every check I wrote, without demanding acknowledgement, strengthened by every silence I offered, instead of truth. They believed they could erase me because I had taught them invisibility was acceptable. But in business, I never tolerated invisibility. I built my empire on visibility, on branding, on relentless presence in the market. The woman who conquered entire industries could not remain invisible forever in her own family. My name is Linda Matthews. I am 62 years old. I am the mother who raised Daniel alone, the woman who saved and sacrificed so he could soar, the founder of a hospitality empire that touches every corner of his wedding celebration. They may have canceled my invitation, but they have no idea that their erasure has only awakened the part of me that refuses to be silenced. 3 weeks before that phone call, I had hosted a family dinner at my house, a gathering that was supposed to celebrate Daniel's engagement. The air was thick with excitement, laughter echoing against the vaulted ceilings, Melissa flashing her diamond ring to every relative who leaned close enough to admire it. Daniel spoke with animated gestures about his vision for the wedding, how he wanted it to be modern yet classic, intimate, but grand. I listened quietly, pouring wine into glasses, offering smiles, because that is what mothers do. Eventually, the conversation shifted, as it always does, to money. Weddings, especially the kind Melissa dreamed of, came with costs that outstripped Daniel's architect's salary. His voice softened, almost embarrassed as he admitted they were struggling. Melissa lowered her eyes, tears brimming just enough to catch the light, her voice trembling as she whispered, "We just want something beautiful, but with my student loans and our mortgage, it feels impossible." The table filled with awkward sympathy. Melissa's parents mumbled about modest savings. Daniel's friends suggested cheaper venues, discount dress shops, chain restaurants for rehearsal dinners. I sat silently, watching my son's eyes flick toward me every few minutes, expectant, waiting, knowing I could solve the problem with the stroke of a pen. I did not speak then. I waited until later when Melissa cornered me in the kitchen. Her mascara smudged, her hands trembling as she clutched mine. "Linda, please," she whispered. "Daniel is too proud to ask, but we don't know what to do. Could you maybe help us connect with some of your contacts? Maybe get a discount, maybe just something small." Her performance was polished, but I saw through it. Still, I am a mother. My instinct was not suspicion, but compassion. That night, after everyone left, I sat at my mahogany desk and wrote a check for $55,000. It was not a reckless act. It was less than 2 days' profit from my hotels, an amount I could spare easily. But to Daniel and Melissa, it was salvation. I told Melissa when I handed it to her the next morning, discreetly in the quiet of my living room. "This stays between us. Let it be a gift, but do not burden Daniel with it. I want his wedding day to feel like a celebration, not a debt." She threw her arms around me, crying into my shoulder, thanking me as if I had handed her oxygen. I thought I had done something good. I thought I had chosen generosity over pride. What I had really done was open the door to betrayal. Weeks later, the betrayal revealed itself in pieces. The first sign was subtle. A vendor called me by accident, asking to confirm new instructions supposedly approved by me. They wanted to know about changes to the seating chart, why my name had been removed. I assumed it was a clerical error. The second sign came from the caterer, who mentioned Daniel had reassured them that all funds were secure, even though some guest names, including mine, had been eliminated. My pulse quickened. But it was the third call from the wedding planner herself that removed any lingering doubt. Daniel had erased me. He had instructed every vendor to treat me as a ghost, but to retain every penny of my gift. Family decision, he had said. I replayed those words again and again, my stomach twisting each time. Family decision meant conversations I had not been invited to. It meant Melissa whispering into Daniel's ear, convincing him I was unstable, that my presence would embarrass them. It meant relatives nodding along, complicit, perhaps relieved that my silence would keep them from confronting their own dependence on my resources. And Daniel, my son, my pride, my only child, had agreed. He had not defended me. He had not stood up to anyone. He had signed me away like a contractor dismissing a supplier. The $55,000 I had given them in love was now the very tool they used to cut me out. My heart burned with humiliation. But beneath the burn came something colder, sharper: realization. By keeping my gift a secret, I had given them the perfect opportunity. They could keep the money and erase me because no one else even knew it had come from me. My own attempt at humility had become the weapon of my undoing. As the planner's voice faded, I pressed my hand flat against the desk, feeling the smooth grain of the polished wood. I thought of every sacrifice that had led me here, every late night balancing books, every missed vacation, every decision to put Daniel first. And for what? To be written out of his life to be replaced at his wedding by the illusion that he and Melissa had built their celebration on their own. Betrayal is not always a sudden knife. Sometimes it is slow, calculated, sharpened by the very hands you once held in love. That day I understood the full scope of their betrayal. They wanted my money. They did not want me. They wanted my empire's wealth, but not its matriarch. And I, Linda Matthews, realized I had been raising not just a son, but an heir who believed he could inherit without respect. The morning after the planner's call, I stepped into the grand lobby of the Desert Palm Resort, one of my flagship properties. Polished marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. The scent of fresh lilies filled the air, and guests in designer suits moved briskly toward conference halls, where multi-million-dollar deals would be brokered under my roof. As I walked through, employees nodded respectfully, some whispering my name with admiration, others straightening their posture in acknowledgement. To them, I was the architect of opportunity, the woman who had turned failing motels into luxury landmarks. My signature on a contract meant their jobs, their futures, their stability. In the world of business, I was a queen. Later that same day, I sat at Daniel's townhouse for a small family brunch. Melissa served store-bought pastries on paper plates and smiled thinly as if she were granting me entry to a world I did not belong to. Daniel introduced me to one of his colleagues with a dismissive wave, saying, "This is my mom. She runs some event stuff, helps out sometimes." Some event stuff. Helps out sometimes. The words lodged in my chest like splinters. I had hosted senators, negotiated with billionaires, directed expansions across 3 states. Yet in that small living room with its peeling paint and half-assembled furniture, my identity was reduced to a hobby. Melissa chimed in sweetly. Old-fashioned, but she tries. The colleague laughed politely, not knowing the insult masked beneath the tone. I smiled as though it did not wound me. I had learned long ago that silence was easier than confrontation. But silence, I was beginning to realize, had built this prison. That weekend, I flew to Las Vegas to finalize the acquisition of a boutique hotel on the Strip. The conference room was filled with lawyers and brokers, and when I entered, the atmosphere shifted. Eyes turned toward me, respect etched into every gaze. Within hours, I had secured a deal that expanded Matthews Hospitality into a new market, a triumph that made headlines in the trade press. My competitors scrambled, my partners congratulated me, and my employees celebrated a victory that meant bonuses and promotions. Yet at Sunday dinner with Daniel and Melissa, my triumph was invisible. Daniel scrolled through his phone while Melissa recounted stories of her friends' engagements, her tone laced with envy and competition. Neither asked about my trip. Neither cared that while they dismissed me as old-fashioned, the industry saw me as unstoppable. The duality became unbearable. Out there, I was untouchable. At home, I was invisible. Melissa's disdain grew bolder with each encounter. She suggested once casually over coffee that maybe I would be more comfortable skipping the wedding planning because big family events sometimes overwhelm older people. She called me older people to my face, her smile practiced, her eyes gleaming with malice. Daniel said nothing. He simply nodded, as though agreeing, as though the mother who raised him alone could not handle an afternoon of choosing flowers and table linens. I excused myself that day, retreating to my office where contracts and spreadsheets waited. I stared at revenue reports that outstripped Fortune 500 companies' numbers that made seasoned investors envious. I thought of how the world outside those family walls bowed to my vision, while inside my own son bowed to the manipulations of a woman who wanted my money but not my presence. The irony struck me with brutal clarity. I had built an empire so vast that even my family's celebration rested upon it, and yet in their eyes, I was a relic. That contrast, powerful in public, powerless in private, was the soil in which betrayal took root. Sitting in my office as the sun dipped behind desert mountains, I realized this was not only about a canceled invitation. It was about years of allowing my worth to be diminished at the dinner table, years of swallowing insults for the sake of family harmony, years of writing checks in silence. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had mistaken humility for irrelevance, but I knew better. I knew what silence could do when it was broken at the right moment. And as I closed my laptop that night, I began to imagine what might happen if the woman who ruled boardrooms decided to rule her family narrative with the same unflinching authority. My empire was not just a business, it was leverage. And leverage, when applied with precision, could bring down entire structures, even weddings, even families. The day after Daniel's text, I sat in my office, staring at the skyline, a bitter taste in my mouth that no amount of coffee could wash away. My phone buzzed with a familiar name, Janet Miller, my attorney of 15 years. She had seen me through acquisitions, mergers, and even the occasional hostile takeover. When I answered, her tone carried the calm steel of a woman who had handled more corporate betrayals than family dramas. But she listened carefully as I explained the situation. When I finished, there was a long pause before she said, "Linda, this isn't family drama. This is fraud. You gave them $55,000 under the premise of funding a celebration you'd attend. They erased you, but kept the money. If a business partner did that, we'd be in court tomorrow." The words rang in my ears. Fraud. She was right. If this had been anyone else, an associate, a contractor, a competitor, I would already have unleashed a team of lawyers. But because it was my son, I had sat quietly bleeding dignity while they pocketed my generosity. Janet continued, "I can draft documents immediately. Contracts tied to your funding will crumble if you withdraw consent. You don't have to tolerate this." She paused, her voice softening. "And you shouldn't." I hung up with her promise to prepare the paperwork. But another call came almost immediately. Richard Chen, my closest business partner, a man who had stood beside me as we turned a bankrupt hotel chain into a regional empire. His voice carried none of the diplomatic caution I had heard from family members. "Linda, that's completely unacceptable behavior. I don't care who's involved. You don't take someone's money and then erase them from the picture. That's not family, that's exploitation." He sighed heavily. "Have you considered this might be strategic, not just cruel? Excluding you while keeping your funding sends a very specific message. They value your resources, not you. They're telling you your place is in the shadows, writing checks, but never stepping into the light." His words sliced through my chest with brutal clarity. That was it. They wanted me as a resource, not as a mother. They wanted the wealth of my empire, but not its matriarch. My son wanted my money, not my presence. Even my staff began to notice the strain on my face. Elena, my assistant, hesitated at my door that afternoon, her brow furrowed. "Mrs. Matthews, several vendors have been calling. They're uncomfortable. They said your son gave instructions that contradict the original agreements. They don't want to move forward without your confirmation. The fact that strangers in the industry recognize the wrong more clearly than my own blood underscored the depth of the betrayal." Even the caterer Copper Canyon reached out discreetly, asking if I had truly approved removing my own name from guest lists. Their discomfort was palpable, their loyalty unshaken. They knew where the real authority lay. I realized then that outside my family, people still saw me. Vendors, lawyers, business partners, they recognized my value, respected my power. It was only within the walls of my son's home that I was invisible. Janet called again later, her voice firmer. "Linda, I've drafted a stop payment clause tied to your deposit. If you want, we can pull everything back legally before they even blink. But that's just one option. You could also let them dig deeper, let them reveal exactly how far they're willing to go. Sometimes silence gives people enough rope to hang themselves." I looked at the papers spread across my desk, contracts detailing every venue, every catering order, every hotel block for out-of-town guests. Each line item connected back to me, to Matthew's hospitality, to the empire I had built brick by brick, while raising a child who now believed he could cut me out. Allies surrounded me now, Janet with her legal precision, Richard with his moral clarity, vendors with their quiet loyalty. The irony was bitter. Strangers treated me with respect. Family treated me as disposable. And in that realization, something inside me hardened. Perhaps I had tolerated invisibility too long. Perhaps the time had come to remind everyone, especially my son, that I was not just a woman with a checkbook. I was the woman who held the keys to the very ground beneath their wedding. And keys, when turned the right way, can lock doors just as easily as they open them. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office with the blinds half-drawn, city lights flickering against the glass, the hum of the desert quiet wrapping around me like a shroud. The betrayal had cut deep, but anger alone wouldn't restore dignity. Words would be wasted on Daniel and Melissa. They had already written their narrative, already painted me as overbearing, unstable, dramatic. I knew better than to fight in the arena they had chosen. My power was not in arguments. My power was in infrastructure. At 2 in the morning, I turned on my laptop, its glow illuminating stacks of contracts and files that detailed the veins of Matthew's hospitality. With a few keystrokes, I pulled up the ownership structures Desert Palm Resort, wholly owned through my corporate umbrella. Copper Canyon Catering, acquired 5 years ago under a different subsidiary. Sunset Ridge Estate, the venue itself purchased in bankruptcy and now thriving under my management. Even the wedding planners firm operated under a holding company I had rescued during a recession. Every thread of Daniel's wedding ran straight through my hands. They thought I was powerless, but they were building their dream day entirely inside my empire. Silent but powerful. This had always been my style. Not shouting, not demanding recognition, but letting numbers and contracts speak louder than any raised voice. I drafted a series of emails with careful clinical language. To the resort, all reservations tied to the Henderson Matthews wedding are to be canceled effective immediately. To the caterer, terminate the menu agreement under Section 4, citing noncompliance with contributor authorization. To the planner, effective today, Matthews Hospitality withdraws all financial support and authorization for this event. Each message ended the same way per company policy directives from unauthorized individuals are null and void. These instructions supersede all prior communication. I read each line aloud, savoring the precision. Not a hint of emotion, just business, just power. At dawn, I signed the stack of legal directives Janet had couriered over. The fountain pen glided across thick paper, each signature a quiet strike, each flourish severing another limb of their wedding machine. I placed the documents in a leather folio, locked it, and slid it into my desk drawer. My empire moved quietly like a tide, and by noon the water would be receding from beneath Daniel and Melissa's feet. I did not call them. I did not warn them. I did not scream. I brewed my coffee-added cream and sipped while my phone buzzed with the first ripple. Elena entered my office just after 9, her eyes wide. Mrs. Matthews Copper Canyon has confirmed cancellation. They sounded nervous, said they've never received such a direct order. I nodded. Good. Make sure they send written confirmation. 10 minutes later, the hotel called. Entire room blocks had been dissolved, deposits returned. Confused bridesmaids were already ringing the front desk demanding explanations. By 11, the venue's manager emailed me personally, a man who had once sat across from me while I rescued his estate from foreclosure. Mrs. Matthews, we've canceled the booking as requested. My loyalty is to you always. Every cancellation was like a domino falling in a chain I had designed years before. Without even realizing I was building toward this moment, silent power. No raised voice, no family fight. Just contracts unraveling, dreams disintegrating, consequences cascading. At noon, I closed my laptop, the work complete. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle, a silence so profound it felt like justice itself. Out there, Daniel and Melissa were probably just waking up to their catastrophe phones ringing off the hook, vendors backing out one by one, friends texting in confusion. They would scramble, panic plead, but I had no intention of answering. This was not about destroying a wedding. It was about balance, about reminding my son that respect is not optional, that a mother is not a wallet, that generosity does not come without dignity. The city hummed below me, indifferent to the chaos unfolding in Daniel's world. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it in the dishwasher. No rage, no tears, no shouting. Only a woman moving pieces across a board she had owned all along. By evening, the game would look entirely different, and Daniel would learn what it meant to erase someone who had built the very ground he stood upon. 2 days later, I extended an invitation of my own. Formal emails were dispatched from my assistant's desk to Daniel, to Melissa, to her parents, and to Daniel's estranged relatives, who had all whispered behind my back about how dramatic I was. The subject line was simple: family meeting. The location, the 32nd floor conference room of Desert Palm Resort. They did not know that the resort they believed belonged to a faceless corporation was mine. I chose that room carefully. Its floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire Phoenix skyline, a panorama of glass and steel that shimmered in the desert sun. The walls were lined with industry awards plaques recognizing achievements they had never bothered to acknowledge, each one a silent witness to the empire they thought irrelevant. I arrived first, dressed in a tailored black suit with silver cufflinks, a quiet crown on my wrist in the form of a Cartier watch. I spread the contracts across the conference table, each document marked with the cancellations I'd executed with precision. When Daniel walked in, his face was pale, his eyes sunken. Melissa clung to his arm, her expression carefully neutral but betraying the panic beneath. Behind them shuffled Melissa's parents, whispering nervously. And finally, my own distant cousins, their faces etched with confusion. The silence that fell when they saw me seated at the head of the table was profound. "Thank you for coming," I began. My voice even measured the same tone I used when closing multi-million-dollar deals. "We have important matters to clarify." Daniel spoke first, his voice cracking. "Mom, you've ruined everything. Every vendor canceled. The hotel rooms, the catering, the venue, they're all gone." His accusation hung in the air like smoke. I placed my hand calmly on the stack of papers before me. "No, Daniel, I didn't ruin anything. You did the moment you decided your mother was unworthy of attending her own son's wedding. You erased me while keeping my $55,000, and you thought I would sit quietly while you humiliated me." Melissa's face flushed crimson. "That's not true," she hissed, but her voice wavered. "We only wanted peace. We didn't want drama at the wedding." I leaned forward, my gaze sharp as glass. "Peace is not achieved through theft and exclusion. Peace is not achieved by erasing the very person funding your dream. You wanted my silence. Now you have it in the form of canceled contracts." Melissa's parents shifted uncomfortably, their hands twisting in their laps. My cousin cleared his throat, murmuring something about misunderstandings, but I silenced him with a raised palm. This was not the time for excuses. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I was trying to protect Melissa, protect our day. You always make everything about you." A ripple of rage flickered through me, but I did not raise my voice. Instead, I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I gave you everything, Daniel. I worked nights, sacrificed sleep, built an empire, so you could have choices. And what did you give me in return? You took my money and called me dramatic. You took my presence and turned it into an inconvenience. You forgot that the very floor beneath your celebration belonged to me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Melissa stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. Daniel's jaw trembled. Even her parents avoided my gaze, their shame palpable. I rose, then gathering the contracts into a neat stack. "The wedding will not happen as you planned. If you wish to marry, you will fund it yourselves. You will apologize to me in writing and in public, or you will explain to your guests why there is no wedding." My heels clicked against the polished floor as I walked toward the window. The city stretched below, every hotel, every resort, every venue, a testament to the life I had built. "You mistook silence for weakness," I said, turning back to face them. "But silence can be the sharpest weapon." The room remained frozen, their eyes wide, their throats tight. For the first time in years, I did not see dismissal in their faces. I saw fear. Respect born of fear is not ideal, but it is a beginning. I gathered my folio, adjusted my cufflinks, and walked out of the room without another word. The conference door closed behind me with a quiet thud that felt like the punctuation mark at the end of a chapter. They had wanted me invisible. Instead, I had made myself unforgettable. The fallout began within hours of that meeting. By the time I returned home, my phone was buzzing with missed calls and frantic voicemails. Daniel's voice cracked through one recording. "Mom, please, we can't rebook anything. Everyone's calling us asking what happened. Just fix it, please." Melissa's messages were colder edged with venom. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone. Do you feel powerful now, Linda? You've destroyed your son's happiness." But beneath the accusations, I heard it, that quiver of desperation. Only people on the edge of ruin can't quite conceal. News travels fast in the hospitality world. Within 2 days, the story of the wedding that collapsed overnight was whispered across Phoenix. Vendors pieced it together quickly. The cancellations weren't random. They were deliberate, ordered from the top. Industry colleagues called me with careful curiosity, some with admiration, a few with warnings about family and business. But in their voices, I heard something new, respect sharpened with caution. Meanwhile, Daniel and Melissa scrambled. They tried to secure new vendors, but every decent hotel in town was mysteriously unavailable. Word of my displeasure spread, and no one wanted to risk burning bridges with Matthew's hospitality. Melissa begged her parents for financial help, but their modest pensions barely covered their mortgage. Daniel asked his college friends for loans, but most laughed nervously and changed the subject. At last, Melissa called me directly. Her voice trembled with fury and fear. "Linda, you're being cruel. We'll tell everyone you're unstable, that you sabotaged your own son's wedding out of spite." I let her rant, then waited for the silence. My reply was calm, almost kind. "Tell them what you like. But remember, contracts don't lie. Paper trails don't vanish. Every vendor will confirm who authorized what. And if you spread slander, I'll treat it as defamation. You've already underestimated me once. Don't make the same mistake again." I hung up before she could answer. Silence was more powerful than any final word. Days later, the inevitable happened. Daniel appeared at my doorstep, his shoulders hunched, his eyes bloodshot. He looked less like the proud architect I had raised, and more like the little boy who once cried when his science project broke. He stepped inside without asking, dropped onto the couch, and covered his face with his hands. "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice was muffled raw. "I thought Melissa was right, that you'd make everything about you. I thought money was just money, that it didn't give you the right to be there." I studied him for a long moment, my heart twisting with old instincts, the urge to comfort, to forgive, to soothe my child's wounds. But I remembered the text message that had told me to calm down, the secret meetings that had erased me, the humiliation that had burned deeper than any business betrayal. Forgiveness could come later, perhaps, but not now. Respect had to come first. Daniel lifted his head, his eyes searching mine. "Please, Mom, we can't afford another wedding. We can't face the guests. Everyone thinks we're pathetic." His words struck me with clarity. They weren't about me or love or even regret. They were about appearances, about saving face. My son wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry for being caught in the wreckage. I smoothed my jacket and walked to the window where sunlight streaked across the desert sky. "Daniel," I said softly, "you treated me as expendable while depending entirely on me. Actions have consequences. You wanted a wedding without me. Now you have neither me nor the wedding." He stared at me, disbelief clouding his face. "You can't mean that. You're my mother." I turned, meeting his gaze steadily. "And you are my son. But motherhood does not mean servitude. You canceled my invitation. You canceled our bond. Now you're left with the silence you demanded." He rose shakily, his lips parting as if to argue, but no words came. Finally, he left, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving only the echo of what had once been love and was now only consequence. In the days that followed, invitations were quietly withdrawn. Guests who had booked flights and hotel rooms scrambled for refunds. The grand wedding became a hushed embarrassment whispered in social circles. Melissa retreated into bitterness, her smile brittle whenever I encountered her name in gossip. And Daniel, my son, my pride, avoided my calls, too ashamed to speak, too proud to beg again. The collapse was complete, not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with silence contracts and the unyielding reminder that respect is not optional even for one's own mother. 2 weeks after the implosion, I met Janet, my attorney, in her corner office downtown. The leather folders on her desk were neatly stacked, and the smell of strong coffee mingled with the faint tang of printer ink. She slid a packet toward me with practiced precision. "Linda, we've finalized the documents. The revisions to your estate plan are complete. Daniel Matthews has been formally removed as beneficiary to your holdings. His name no longer appears on trust allocations or property transfers." I flipped through the papers, my eyes catching the new designations: scholarship funds for hospitality students, charitable trusts for community housing projects, and a substantial allocation to my employees' profit-sharing program. My life's work would not vanish into the ungrateful hands of a son who saw me only as a bank. It would uplift those who had stood with me, not against me. Janet's voice softened. "Are you certain, Linda? This is final." I nodded, more certain than I've ever been. The following Sunday, I attended church for the first time in months. Not because I sought divine intervention, but because I needed the quiet, the hymn-filled air, the reminder that integrity was not negotiable. A few parishioners whispered greetings, their smiles warm. One woman leaned close, murmuring, "I heard what your family did. You were right to stand firm." Even strangers seemed to understand the justice of my decision. Meanwhile, Daniel and Melissa's lives unraveled in smaller, quieter ways. The canceled wedding became a cautionary tale in their circle of friends. Invitations had been rescinded, deposits vanished, reputations tarnished. Melissa posted bitter comments on social media blaming me for destroying their future. Yet beneath the anger lay humiliation that could not be scrubbed away. Employers whispered. Colleagues gossiped. The story grew with every retelling: the son who tried to erase his mother and lost everything instead. One evening, Richard Chen called me, his voice tinged with both pride and amusement. "Linda, 3 new investors approached us today. They said your handling of the wedding fiasco proved more about your leadership than any balance sheet ever could. They want in not just because of your numbers, but because of your resolve. Even in personal crises, you operate with clarity." His words confirmed what I already knew: power once revealed cannot be put back in the shadows. And yet the deepest justice was not in contracts or investors. It was in the silence of my own home. A silence that no longer felt empty, but liberating. For years, I had tiptoed around Daniel's moods, Melissa's sharp words, family dinners where my success was dismissed. I had believed that being a mother meant endless giving, endless sacrifice. But now I understood motherhood without respect is exploitation. And I was finished being exploited. Daniel tried one last time. He arrived late at night, unshaven, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He stood on my porch clutching a bouquet of wilted roses. His voice cracked as he spoke through the screen door. "Mom, please, we can start over. Melissa and I, we were wrong. We shouldn't have done it. Just give us another chance." For a moment, my heart ached. He was still my son, the boy I had held against my chest, the child I had sacrificed everything for. But then I remembered the text. "Stop being dramatic." I remembered the planner's hesitant voice. He said it was a family decision. I remembered the weight of humiliation. I opened the door just wide enough to speak. "Daniel, love requires respect. You canceled both. There are no do-overs when trust is destroyed." His shoulders sagged, the roses slipping in his grip. "Please," he whispered. I shook my head gently. "I wish you happiness, Daniel, but happiness without integrity is hollow. Go build your own life without my name, without my wealth." And then I closed the door. Behind it, I leaned against the wood, my chest heavy, but my spirit unbroken. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't vengeful. It was quiet, firm, final. For the first time in decades, I felt whole. 3 months passed, and the desert summer rolled into autumn. The wedding that never happened had become legend in Phoenix's social and business circles. People whispered about it at charity galas, discussed it over coffee, and even vendors referenced it as a cautionary tale. They called it the wedding that vanished. Some versions painted me as ruthless, others as brave. But all agreed on one truth: Linda Matthews was not a woman to underestimate. Meanwhile, my life moved forward with quiet determination. The new headquarters of Matthews Hospitality opened in Scottsdale, a glass tower that reflected the golden hues of sunset. Standing in my corner office on the top floor, I often watched the horizon burn orange and red. The city spread beneath me like a kingdom I had built with my own hands. Each decision, each risk, each sleepless night, it was all there shimmering in the lights below. My empire was stronger than ever, and my reputation had evolved from respected businesswoman to living legend. Daniel and Melissa's path was very different. Without the wedding, they tried to stage a smaller ceremony, but support had dried up. Friends had distanced themselves, embarrassed by association. Melissa's family, once eager to benefit from my generosity, no longer returned her calls. Daniel's firm quietly reduced his role on projects, whispering about his instability. The humiliation was complete not because I had destroyed them, but because they had destroyed themselves. Actions carry consequences. That was the lesson they had refused to learn until it was too late. One afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail, Daniel's handwriting shaky on the front. Inside was a letter, pages of apologies, mixed with excuses, sorrow tangled with justification. He wrote of pressure from Melissa, of fear of confrontation, of his belief that money excused everything. I read each word carefully, my heart aching but steady. Then I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. Some wounds cannot be erased by ink on paper. In contrast, my relationships with those who had stood by me deepened. Janet remained my trusted legal counsel, sharper than ever. Richard became not just a business partner, but a confidant, his moral clarity a light during dark days. And my employees, the lifeblood of Matthews Hospitality, received profit-sharing checks larger than ever, a tangible reminder that loyalty is rewarded. I found more family in boardrooms and break rooms than I ever had at a dinner table with blood relatives. Perhaps the most healing moment came quietly, without fanfare. I visited one of our resorts in Sedona, walking alone through the Red Rock Gardens at dusk. Guests smiled at me without knowing who I was. Children laughed by the fountains, and a young couple held hands as they admired the view. I realized then that legacy is not in the approval of ungrateful children, but in the lives touched by your work and the dignity you refuse to surrender, in the quiet strength you finally claim. For years I had given silently, believing humility was noble. But silence without boundaries is an invitation for exploitation. The moment I chose to speak through contracts, through cancellations, through the calm authority of action, was the moment I reclaimed not only my respect, but my peace. Now, when I wake each morning, I brew my coffee, open my laptop, and review expansion plans for new properties. My days are filled with decisions that ripple across states, impacting thousands. But my nights are filled with something rarer, the calm of knowing I am no longer invisible in my own story. I am seen, if only by myself, and that is enough. The moral is clear. Respect is not negotiable. Family bonds do not excuse betrayal. Money cannot replace love, but neither can love survive without dignity. I lost a son the day he chose to erase me, but I found myself in the silence that followed. And sometimes finding yourself is the greatest justice of all. When the desert sun sets, now painting the sky in colors no decorator could mimic, I sit by the window and smile. My empire stands tall, my dignity remains intact, and my story, the story of a woman who refused to be erased, reminds me that quiet strength can shake the very foundations of those who mistake generosity for weakness.